Hey there, welcome to my January wrap-up. Today we're going to be talking about the 6 books that I read in the month of January. We had a good start to the year. Not an excellent start, but a good start. And even though I only read 6 books, I did have quite the variety. So I'm just looking at my Storygraph stats. It looks like in terms of mood that I read, it was reflective, emotional, tense, and adventurous. That is not a surprise for anyone. I only read fiction in January. I do try to read 1 nonfiction and 1 short story a month at least. I didn't get to nonfiction, unfortunately. In terms of genres, I did read 3 literary, 2 science fiction, and 2 contemporary, and within that I had 1 short story collection that I read. My ratings were also all over the place. I had 1 3-star, 1 3.25 stars, 2 3.5 stars, 1 4-star, and then 1 5-star that I read in January. Before we get started, so I've been making content on TikTok off and on in between not being here on YouTube. And I feel like I've gotten used to the wrap-up styles of TikTok where I'm very concise and very quick and I don't dive deeper into what the books are about or very deep into my thoughts. So now that I'm back on YouTube making content, I feel like it's going to be an adjustment. But if you do have a preference, let me know. I would really like your thoughts on whether you like something more short and concise or a more in-depth review. I'm just going to talk about the books in reading order, starting off especially with the physical books that I have. So as you know, I'm currently in the middle of reading the Expand series by James S. A. Corey, and I did read 2 of the books in January. I read books 3 and 4, which is Abbadon's Gate and Cibola Burn. I gave it 3.25 stars and 3.5 stars. They were around 3 stars, both of these. So once again, James and his crew end up in the middle of a conflict that they can't really easily get out of. There is also a revenge storyline in here. There's a lot of discussions on competing ideologies of what's right and wrong, about forgiveness, and about accountability and what that looks like for people who have caused harm and what that looks like at an interpersonal level. I think some of the biggest conversations that I really liked in here is this idea of not shooting first and taking a different non-violent approach to conflicts. That's what I got out of this one. Now we have Cibola Burn, and yet again, James and his crew find themselves in the middle of a conflict. This time, it was not self-imposed though. This time, they are more observers to a conflict that is unfolding. And I think a really good conversation for this one is how neutrality isn't actually neutral. When you take a neutral stance in something, you are actually taking a side, whether you like it or not. So that's what I took out of this one. So those were the 2 science fiction books that I read in the month of January. The rest of the books on this list were actual arcs, and I read them as a mix of audiobook and on my Kindle. I did listen to Bad Asians by Lillian Li. This was published this month on February 17th. So it hasn't been published yet. It's gonna come out soon. This was a messy book. It was like a train wreck happening that you couldn't look away from. It's a story about friendship, expectations, and the like Wild West era of internet culture. So we follow this tight-knit group of 4 Chinese American friends who have a fallout after a video of theirs goes viral that paints them as caricatures. All 4 of these characters are deeply flawed. There is not a single person within the story that is not messy, that is not human, that is not reacting and maybe potentially putting their not best foot forward. It's an examination of middle-class Chinese American families in the United States, the crushing expectations of immigrant parents and the way that they almost pit you against your friends because you'll never be able to measure up. If for Valentine's Day, let's say that you are not looking for a romance book, but you want a book about friendships and friends, I think this is one that you could check out. Next, I read a thriller horror book. This is Warning Signs by Tracy Sierra. This was also published in February, on February 10th. Tracy Sierra wrote the book Night Watching, which was one of my favorite books last year or the year before that. I just really love how atmospheric her books feel. When I was reading Night Watching, I felt like I was there in the house and I was scared out of my mind. Warning Signs is also extremely atmospheric. I loved the passages that she wrote about being up on the mountain. It was very picturesque. I could feel like I was there. This is a story about a son and father skiing trip that goes wrong and turns deadly. It is told from the perspective of the boy, who I think is 12 years old. And even though he is younger than his father and the investors that he invited on this trip, he knows a lot more about ski safety, about mountain conditions, and all of that because his mother taught him all of this. I did learn a lot about avalanches in this book. This is a book that I enjoyed, but I didn't love it. I think it was challenging to read the story from our main character's perspective because he is so young, and because of that, there's a lot of things that he doesn't quite understand and he can't put together. And that was a little bit frustrating. His mother died under interesting circumstances, and he has never had a really good relationship with his father. And so apart from being out in this vast wilderness with all of these warning signs and realizing that something is not right, these adults are not listening to him. They do not hear him. And on top of that, he is constantly monitoring his dad for threat, trying to make sure he's in a good mood, trying to make sure that he is not overstepping. And so I guess in a way, it was a little bit anxiety inducing to be in his head, but because he is in this very specific scenario, at times he feels like a very scared child who has no agency, but there's other scenes where he just feels like a completely different character. And I'm not saying that children can't be complex and be two things at once. It just felt like he wasn't the same character, and I think it could have been done in a better way. My favorite book by far that I've read in 2026 and that I read in January is Eating Ashes by Brenda Navarro. This is a translated novel from the Spanish. It's a story that is told in a very raw and unpolished way, and I mean that in the best way possible. It's this haunting, intimate, and deeply human look at grief. We follow this unnamed narrator and her brother Diego. They grew up in Mexico while their mother was living abroad in Spain, and eventually they moved there to reconnect with her. Now, from the beginning of the novel, we know that Diego has committed suicide, and so the rest of the story is told in this non-linear format in the before and after this event has occurred. Our unnamed narrator talks to us about their experience living in Mexico, about the extreme loneliness and some of the humiliations they faced as an immigrant living abroad in Spain. And then we also follow her home as she's bringing home her brother's ashes. The best way that I can describe this book is if you're sitting with a close friend and it's late at night and you're drinking coffee or you're sharing a beer or a glass of wine, and this person is letting you into some of their most messiest parts of their life and just sharing their story with you. That's how it felt reading this book. I'm guessing it also felt that way because I listened to it as an audiobook, which at first was a bit jarring because the narrator is very passionate, and so some of these scenes felt very over dramatized, but it was the emotion that was needed for that part of the story. So I loved it. This was my favorite book that I read in January. Also, my cat came to say hi. She's like drooling on me. This is Sochi. Hello. We have one more book to talk about. So the one short story collection that I did read in January is called One Son Only, Stories by Camille Bordas. This was published in January, and they are literary, character-driven short stories about the human experience. It's about the little mundane things that happen in life that we don't talk about, but it's also a little messy. It's about those things that most people don't want to talk about or acknowledge. One of my favorite stories in this is this guy who is dead set on proving that his sister-in-law is not colorblind, and the lengths he will go to prove that. I liked them. They were good. They were well written. I will say most of these stories are plotless and meandering, so if you don't like, those were all of the books that I read in January. I would love to hear what you have been reading. What did you read? Bye! Bye!